Agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
I second.
We have a motion by Knight, a second by McKee Kent. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, that passes. So now we have a new town manager, and tonight is his first meeting. So just a hearty welcome from the council, the town of Yountville, and if you'd like to say a few words, please do.
Yeah, well, thank you. I feel like I've already got local status. I feel like I've been here some time, but no, I want to start by thanking all of you for obviously selecting me and giving me the privilege to help manage your beautiful town, and that it is. It's been great to get to know the town, at least in this first month. All of you know, but for the community, my wife and I have moved into the town, and we're almost moved in, and that's been a fun process to really just get to know the community. I also want to give thanks to my predecessor, Steve Rogers, and really all of the staff. John's here somewhere. Oh, there he is in the corner. Specifically, John for taking on the interim role and doing a great job in that process. And the good thing about having 35 employees is you get to meet them all and get to know them all pretty quick. So I'm grateful to the staff and Gary and all the support that has been provided to me as I'm getting to know the job. I've met a lot of you, but for those that don't know me, I came from the city of National City, where I worked for almost 17 years and 4 years as the city manager, and kind of came up through community development and other jobs along the way. But I was born and raised in La Jolla, California, down in San Diego. And I went to college up in Berkeley, so I got my taste of Northern California and did a lot of number of things, which, hopefully prepared me for this job. I think it did, and I feel confident, again, with the staff and just back to appreciating the council and you deciding to pick me. So I hope that I meet up to your expectations, and I will work hard to do that. So thank you again, and I will be making the rounds with all of the boards and commissions, and I've been at a number of community events. So hopefully I'm approachable. Please come up and talk to me about whatever is on your mind. And I think my door's always open to the community, and clearly I intend to continue moving this town forward. So thank you again.
And thank you for coming to help us here in the town of Yountville. So we hope your tenure is as wonderful as we expect it to be. So thank you.
Thank you.
And next I have a proclamation for Jim McDonald. If you could meet me at the podium, please. It's a recognition. Sorry, it's not a proclamation.
Thank you. Wow. And is there like Mike, if I want to say a couple things?
Sure. Let me just kind of read this real quick and
Okay.
get to the microphone here, and then it'll be all yours. So this is a certificate of appreciation to Jim McDonald for serving us at the Yountville Arts Commission. The town council and staff express a sincere thank you for your contributions and service to the town of Yountville as a member of the Yountville Art Commission between July 2016 and July 2023. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you to the council. Thank you for the proclamation or recognition. I'd like to say a few words. 7 years ago, I expressed an interest in an opening in the Yountville Arts Commission, and the chair at the time was Kim Cook, and she said, well, come to a meeting and see if you think you want to do it. I went to the meeting, I applied, and in this very council chamber, I was interviewed, and obviously somebody thought I could do the job, and it's been a long time, and a lot of things have passed since then. A couple of things I want to say. First, I'll tell you that any contribution I made was part of a team effort, and my team is here today. Cindy, Jeff, Judy, Rhonda, Noel. Have I missed? And who's not here, but part of the team is PJ Hudson as well. So, did I miss anybody? I don't think so. And I have a former Yountville Arts Commissioner in Robin sitting up there in front of me. So the commission is organized into subcommittees that bring art and art programming to Yountville. And I'm proud to have served with very capable arts commissioners in Yountville. And these are all individuals who roll up their sleeves and get the job done. And so I think the work that we've accomplished is part of the reason that I'm very proud to have been on the Arts Commission. Second, the Town Council has always been very supportive of the Arts Commission. So I applaud all of you and some former council members who also were involved during my tenure. And I also want to thank, Steve's not here, but Steve Rogers and Samantha Holland in the back always stood behind us and kept us on the right path. So I very much appreciated their role in anything that we did. People, including the commission, the council, and the community, are the reason that Yountville has long been the art heart of the Napa Valley. I truly believe that, and it's amazing what can be accomplished when we all work together. So thank you for allowing me to speak a few words, and thank you for the recognition.
You're very welcome. Don't forget your bottle of wine. Don't forget that bottle of wine. That's a. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate everything you've done, Jim, and the whole Art Commission. Thank you. Next is public comment, and this is on any matter that is not on today's agenda. So if anybody have public comment, please come up and state your name if you would like.
Yeah, Tom Bartizano. Brad, welcome to Yountville. I haven't met you yet, but congratulations. I am up here primarily about 6630 Jefferson and the destruction of that 135-year-old building that's now kind of a pile of kindling wood over there. I want to start off with Sandy Ilsley. I work for Ernie and Dave Ilsley. Sandy Ilsley, their mother. I've known her for all my life, but she went through some old newspaper articles. And one of them here that she brought me to make a copy of that I found on the internet is from the LA Times. It's Yountville Low Man on the census poll. And it's a little misleading. It's from 1975 or 79. Yountville was a poor town, but it gives you a sense of Yountville, which I remember my family talking about all the time. I remember my uncle and Don Schmidt and my dad talking about these things. You know, how can we get people off the highway from when they're going to St. Helena and Calistoga, right? So this kind of gives a flavor of that. Part of that is the zoning, you know, and we have the Ag Preserve, which has preserved this valley so we can farm. It's not like Santa Clara. You got buildings side by side. We have a thriving industry. The zoning in the town, I think, is the same thing. We're trying to preserve the history of Old Town. There's zoning in there that a lot of thought was gone into. How do we preserve the character of this town? And Old Town was a big part of that. My family, other people that have done business in this town, been very respectful of zoning and being collaborative. The owners of that property on their website talk about being collaborative. They also talk about, what was the other one that I liked there? Enjoying a challenge and driven to overcome obstacles. That is the total opposite of those two things. And I'm really upset about it because I just think history is an important part of any community. And I'm just kind of fed up with people just This is a cost benefit analysis. I bet you it cost him more to fix that building than it was to pay a fine. And I had a conversation with him. I read in the paper that, I just don't know. You don't know the whole story. And I think that's really condescending to everybody sitting here in this building, the people in the past that have worked so hard to set up these zoning laws to preserve the character of this town. And he isn't the smartest person. He doesn't know what's best for all of us. We all know what's best for all of us. So, sorry for my shaky voice. But anyways, the word that keeps coming to my mind is I'm just disgusted with that act. And I would go for the jugular, but, that might be a little more too aggressive. And I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bardesano. Could I have the town manager? Would you like to comment?
Sure. I intended to provide a short report at the end of the meeting, but I'm happy to move it forward based on the public comment. But I think the town is aware that we issued a notice of violation. I know it was reported in the Sun in terms of the issue that was a clear violation. I will tell you, since then, we have met with the applicant. We are working towards creating a plan moving forward that, one, respects the permit that was issued, which obviously was violated, but secondly, observes all state laws and remedies that the town has available. So once there is a formal plan, I'll report back to council, and we can make sure the community is aware of the plan moving forward. It should take a little time because it's complicated, but I would expect in the next couple of months we'll have something to report back that'll be more clear so we can talk about a path forward.
Thank you very much. Anybody else like to come forward and state your name, if you'd like?
Sure.
I'm going to move the mic down a little bit.
You think?
Yeah, that's my position there.
My name is Stephen Miller. I'm a professional architect and designer, a history buff, a resident of Old Town, and the current chair of the Zoning and Design Review Board of Yountville. I wrote this in response to my dismay and anger about the removal of not only a very large, healthy tree across the street from my house, but also this historic property, the Webb House, just down the street from me. And I am here today to really just speak to the why it matters rather than what happened. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I stand before you today to address a matter of utmost importance to our community. The preservation and protection of historical architectural assets. Our town's rich history is embodied in the magnificent buildings and structures that have stood the test of time, bearing witness to the stories and memories of generations past. These architectural marvels are not merely bricks and mortar. They are the very essence of our identity, connecting us to our roots and shaping our collective future. As the march of progress sweeps across our nation, we find ourselves at a critical juncture where our heritage is at risk. Rapid urbanization and modernization have led to the unfortunate demolition of significant historical structures, erasing tangible links to our past and robbing future generations of the chance to experience the architectural wonders that define our town's character. We must take a stand against this cultural erosion and assert our commitment to preserving our architectural heritage. Historical buildings hold stories within their walls, stories of triumphs and struggles, of innovation and tradition, of the people who once lived, worked, and played within their confines. They are a testament to our collective journey and an invaluable educational resource for future generations. By demolishing these assets, we sever the threads that bind us to our past, leaving us disconnected from our roots and depriving us of the chance to understand and appreciate the struggles and achievements of those that came before him. Preservation of our historical and architectural assets is not just an act of nostalgia. It is an investment in our future. These buildings have the power to attract tourism, bolstering our local economy and generating opportunities for small businesses. They serve as a source of inspiration for architects, designers, artists, reminding them of intricate craftsmanship and timeless beauty that can be achieved with dedication and passion. By protecting these assets, we ensure that our town remains a vibrant and culturally enriched community that draws visitors, residents, and businesses alike. To reinforce our commitment to preserving our architectural heritage, we must impose steep consequences for those who disregard the significance of these structures and engage in their wanton demolition. Such action should not go unpunished. Implementing strict regulations and penalties will serve as a deterrent to potential offenders, forcing them to reconsider their actions and encouraging them to explore alternative avenues that embrace preservation and restoration. Additionally, we should establish incentives that support systems to assist property owners in maintaining and restoring historical buildings. Financial aid, tax credits, and grants can help alleviate the burden of upkeep and encourage responsible stewardship of our architectural treasures. Collaborating with preservation organizations, experts can provide guidance and resources to ensure that our efforts are effective and sustainable. In conclusion, our town's historical architectural assets are irreplaceable treasures that deserve our utmost protection. Let us recognize their intrinsic value, not just as structures, but as the living embodiment of our shared history. By imposing severe consequences for demolition of these assets and actively promoting their preservation, we can forge a future that cherishes our past, empowers our present, and inspires generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have additional public comment? Yes, sir. Please come up.
I'm Michael Bork. I live just down the street from that very property.
Can you raise your microphone?
Of course. How's
Our
that?
streaming can hear,
okay,
hear you.
no problem. Anyway, I'm really grateful for the emotional comments that have been made prior to me standing. I just want to say that my sense is there's probably very little that we can do about that particular action. However, we could force them to go by the ZDRB again and make sure that they come up with a plan that is acceptable to the community based on the action that they've just taken. I also think that it might be appropriate for that review to take 4 or 5 years. In seriousness, no, I want to say that Kathy and I moved to town 32 years ago. We live on Jefferson Street. That neighborhood, when I first saw it, I was so pleased that we found a house there because it had just this wonderful character. There was a house that had the cars up on the blocks. There are still some chickens, but there used to be more chickens on that street. The fact that they're building the house that they're planning on, and as opposed to 2, as I understood there would be, and one of those, of course, including that historic property, really changes this neighborhood. You know, we've gone from little houses to bigger and bigger houses. The next thing we're going to have is the monstrosities that we have out on Fennell. Somebody's going to build something like that. Maybe they're going to put it in the new spot that's over by the Crossroads and Yount. So this is a good opportunity to really consider what's going on in our community. ZDRB should really seriously look at that and take their time, and perhaps, you know, this should be something that's really out in the open. I'm really appreciative of the fact that the council has openly embraced a more cooperative and communicative stance with the community, and this is obviously one of those places where that could occur. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to come up during public comment? Seeing none, thank you for your comments, and we're going to move on to the consent calendar. Is there any discussion, or do we have a motion and a second?
I'll make a motion to approve consent calendar item, all the items A through G.
I will second the motion. So we have a motion by Knight and a second by Mueller to approve consent calendar items A through G. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? That passes unanimously. And
Mayor,
Vice Mayor would like to make a comment?
Thank you. I just want to take the opportunity to thank 4 members of the community that volunteered for the Arts Commission and for the Town of Yountville Community Foundation. And so in our consent calendar, we approved reappointing Cindy Capchin and Judy Meredith to the Arts Commission, and we welcomed former Vice Mayor Rita Dorenbecker to the Arts Commission. So thank you for applying and reapplying, and for all, we appreciate all the work that you do. And as usual, a big thank you to Sandy Fagan. She was a founding member of the Town of Yountville Community Foundation. She's up again to participate. She's invaluable to that committee, and I know in her interview she was very thankful for the work that our Parks and Rec Director does for the Community Foundation. So thank you, Sandy, as well, and thank you for Cindy, Judith, and Marita for your appointment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So with that, we're going to get ready for a public hearing, so I'll give everybody a few minutes in case you're not that interested in development impact fees. But if you are, you're more than welcome to stay. And Jim, don't forget your bottle of wine. There you go.
Bye, congratulations. Thank you, Marita.
Great. I'm glad we've got people here who really want to hear this public hearing. So with that, our next item is a public hearing where we are going to consider a resolution approving some revised developer impact fees and capacity charges. And we're going to conduct a public hearing. So I will start off by just opening the public hearing, and I think we're going to have a staff report by Celia.
Yes, thank
Okay,
you, Mayor.
great.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Town Council. Today we are bringing back to the Town Council the 2023 Development Impact Fee and Capacity Fee Study. The main purpose of this study is to ensure that the town's development impact fees and capacity fees are in compliance, thank you, with state law as outlined in the Mitigation Fee Act, also known as AB 1600. This report is also meant to evaluate and update existing fees and recommend new fees for the Town Council to consider adopting. To complete this study, the town partnered with Doug Dove and Michael DeGroot from Bartle Wells Associates, and Michael is here again at the meeting today to present the final study to the Town Council. This study was previously brought to the Town Council in May for discussion and feedback, and in this meeting we will present the revised draft of the report based on the feedback received. After Michael's presentation, we will be available to answer any remaining questions that the Town Council may have about this study before the public hearing.
Thank you very
with
much
that,
for that.
Would you like to come up,
Michael, would you like to come up to the podium? We have your slides all loaded up, and thanks for coming tonight.
Good afternoon. Oh. Well, maybe it's not on. Oh, no problem.
New battery?
All right, great. So next slide, please. So I'm going to go over an overview. Next slide. So in our presentation, the agenda was to talk about the previous 2005 study, discuss the legal requirements, and talk about the changes since the 2005 study. And this is just to recap. We've presented this at the last meeting as well. And then we will go over the updated proposed fees and current fee comparison. Next slide. So this is background on the 2005 study. Next slide. So the 2005 Development Impact Fee and Capacity Fee Study allocated the value of new and existing capital facilities to new development, and it created some new fees covering civic facilities, flood control projects, and parks. It also updated your existing fees, which are the water and sewer capacity fees, traffic facility fees, and affordable housing fees. The 2005 study abided by the Government Code 66,000, which requires that DIF revenue need to be less than the value of the facilities benefiting new development, and that fee revenue can only be used to fund construction of identified improvements. Next slide. So Government Code 66,000 has some procedural and substantive requirements. The procedural requirements are to avoid commingling the funds and to provide the public an annual description of any funds being held and reimburse if the funds are held too long without spending. And the substantive requirements are to identify the purpose and use of the fee, determine a reasonable relationship between the fee's use and type of development paying the fee, and also determine a reasonable relationship between the amount of the fee and the cost of the facility being funded. Next slide. So in 2005, we used a common methodology for capacity, including a buy-in component and a future infrastructure component. And in 2005, a certain amount of capacity was available in the existing system, so new connections were required to pay a portion of the overall system value. And about 14% of all development was intended to benefit future users, and so the costs were allocated accordingly. And the 2005 study applied the methodology to water and sewer capacity fees, parks and rec, public safety, civic facility, traffic, and drainage and flood control. And the affordable housing impact fee used a different methodology. Next slide. So this is the current legislation and rules regarding development impact fees. Next slide. So what is a development impact fee? They're for the purpose of covering the cost of new levels of service provided by public facilities. And they don't include your park offset fees, processing fees, Section 65864 fees, or redevelopment project fees. Next slide. So the statutory framework, there's the Mitigation Fee Act, which applies to a monetary exaction imposed by a local agency as condition of approval of a development project to defray a public facility cost related to the project. And so a development project is a project where a permit needs to be issued. The public agency needs to establish the fee's purpose and that the fee's use and the public needs are related to the type of development. So it can't be imposed for general purposes. Next slide. So there's some new updates and new procedural requirements from a new law. There's now a 5-year accounting requirement. So every 5 years you need to do an accounting of which type of fees are being held for which upcoming projects. And failure to comply requires the agency to refund the money. If the agency has accrued sufficient funds to fund the project and does not do so for 180 days, they may be required to refund it. And you also need to include a CIP in the Nexus study. Next slide. And the new substantive requirements are that you must prepare and adopt an impact nexus study to establish the reasonable relationship. And updates to the methodology must include consideration of already collected revenues, and fees for residential development need to be based on square footage of proposed units unless we make a specific finding that a different method satisfies the proportionality. And some cases have indicated that buy-in components of these DIF fees is not allowable anymore, so only future capital costs can be considered. Next slide. So these are the proposed fees and current fee comparison. Next slide. This is the proposed water capacity fee, and we're proposing to charge this fee based on the size of the meter. And so the proposed fee would vary from $4,662 up to $248,463 for an 8-inch meter. And that's based on the American Water Works Association standard meter ratios. So 8-inch meter would have about 53.3 times the capacity in terms of gallons per minute. And so they'd pay that ratio more than the 3/4 inch. And there's also, we're proposing a square footage of floor area fee for accessory dwelling units of $2.23. Next slide. This is the proposed sewer capacity fee, and this would also be based on the size of the meter, and that would vary from $10,795 up to $575,000. It's based on the same methodology as the water, except there's also a component for strength factor. And so a low-strength customer, such as a church or school, would pay a factor of 0.7, whereas a high-strength customer, such as a restaurant, would pay a factor of 2.6. And we're also proposing the dollar of square footage of floor area of $5.16 for accessory dwelling units. Next slide. We have actually two options when it comes to ADUs, and this is some of the feedback we heard last time of, is there a way to defray the cost for the ADUs? And in terms of the capacity fees, we've provided two options. Option one would be to charge the fees based on the square footage of the proposed fee. And then option two would be to only charge the proposed capacity fee in the case that existing meter is upsized to accommodate an ADU or for any other purpose. And so you would credit the account for the capacity fee value of their existing meter and charge just for the additional capacity. Next slide. So these are the proposed fees and current fees comparison. And I just want to point out that this is the example for the single-family home of 46,189 is based on 2,090 square feet and a 3/4 inch water meter. So the development impact fees would vary based on the square footage of floor area of any additions or new development, whereas the capacity fees are based on the size of the meter for most customers. And another thing to look at is the affordable housing fair share fee. Currently, your town has not identified any affordable housing projects, so that would not be imposed until low-income housing projects can be identified. So next slide, and that's it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And does the council have any questions of Celia or Michael? Yes, Councilmember Tripp.
And this may be more of a question for Gary, but in terms of the affordable housing fee, which is $24,000, which would apply to a new dwelling if we had identified a project, identified is kind of a general word. How clear do we actually need a project, or I guess that would be my question, before we could charge that fee, which I think makes sense. So that's my question.
Yeah, so essentially the development impact fees are, a special pool of funds designed to recover capital projects in the next 5 years. So you need to reasonably expect to spend that money, or else you need to either refund it or explain why you still need it.
And so, yes, there needs to be an identified project. That was the reference to the CIP. And so including a project within that CIP that will be specifically funded by that fee is required, because that's what's being paid into.
So does it need to be a project sponsored by the town, or could it be an affordable housing where someone has applied? Do you see what I'm saying?
So could the fee go to pay for someone else's installing of affordable housing?
Right,
Is
if
that
the town incurred some costs associated with that.
It depends on how that program was set up. It would typically go towards a town program, though, something that the town is constructing, because it goes for capital improvements. That's a defined term in the Mitigation Fee Act for what qualifies as a capital improvement. So we'd have to explore what that program might look like, but typically it's some town capital improvement.
Okay, so it'd be something the town constructed. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Reeves.
I'm wondering, is this DIF that you have up there for the affordable housing, is that a standalone fee that's aside and in addition to what we require developers of larger parcels to give us inclusionary housing? So they do both?
Yeah. Well, I believe that you have some policy in place for in lieu of fees. I'm not 100%.
I believe so. So there, what Councilmember Reeves is referring to is the town's inclusionary housing ordinance, which applies when 5 or more units go in. You can either put in a certain number at a certain affordability level, depending on the number of units that are going in, or pay an in lieu fee to the town instead of putting in those units into the development that's being proposed. That program is separate from these impact fees, and so I do believe the two would happen concurrently.
Great. And then I had a question about the affordable housing impact fees. They're assessed on new development, but in here I read a little bit that it's also applied to remodels and that kind of thing. Yes or no?
Yeah, it would be expansions. So only
Expansion.
expansions.
Okay, so my concern is that if someone, say, wanted to add an extra bedroom and their square footage was X that they were applying for, could there be an exception for smaller square foot projects as opposed to a large-scale remodel?
Yeah, so as is, we're not providing an exception, so it would be $11.60, as you can see up there, for the additional square footage.
Okay, so it wouldn't be the full 24,000?
No. It would just be for the development impact fees, they're all based on dollar per square foot of floor area. So it would be the additional floor area, and it'd be $11.60 per square foot.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilmember McKee Kent.
Thank you very much. On that same slide, Michael, why are undergrounding utility fees lowered? And yeah, that line item.
Right.
When that was one of the kind of directives that we had discussed last time.
Yes, so last time we did not have an undergrounding of facilities fee, so we were proposing to eliminate that fee. And the reason it's lower is because it has to be based on capital projects that are in your capital improvement plan for the next 5 years.
Okay.
And so that's the amount that we could justify based on your capital improvement plan.
Since we don't have any particularly named right now.
Right.
Okay. And then my other question, with regards to the sewer capacity fee, do you need us to decide on one of those options, one or two?
Yes, for the
direction?
capacity fees, looking for some direction on which option you prefer, whether to charge for ADUs or just base it on if the meter is upsized.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from council?
Go ahead, Eric, and then I'll ask my question.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I guess the initial question I had is in terms of when we look at, primarily we've been talking about the undergrounding, maybe in the affordable housing, maybe it's also a question for the town attorney. We're approving this by resolution, so as projects develop over time, then we just update the resolution and the fees that are in it. Is that how the council would act in the future?
So to change the amount of these fees in the future, is that the question?
When we talk about, like with the affordable housing fair share fee, is proposed fee not imposed until a housing project is identified, or maybe the same thing for changes in the undergrounding of the utility fees. So.
Yeah, so for that, there would be a process for identifying that and including it in a future CIP before that particular fee could be charged. The other fees here, though, would take effect within 60 days of your adoption if you were adopted today, and it would apply to projects that projects that are deemed complete in the application process and receive a building permit after that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Gary, I have a question for you, too, in terms of our options for ADUs. Could we kind of, split things up here as a possibility that, and I'm basing this on, I'm assuming, based on the chart, that the the number, if you're going to build an ADU and impose a fee based on square footage, is going to be higher, and I think it'll be lower, generally speaking, if you're going to just upsize the meter and charge it on that. So, as a way to encourage somebody putting their unit into an affordable housing unit, could we say option option 2 would apply for one set of circumstances, and then option 1 for a different set? Can we ascribe conditions like that?
Yep, perhaps, but I think a little bit of background on the distinction here and the special rules that apply to ADUs, and I believe that was Councilmember Tripp's question as well, is probably worth doing in getting into the details of this. The state ADU law has for several years now prevented the town from imposing connection and capacity charges on certain ADUs and also impact fees on certain ADUs. And that law is still in place. It's currently 750 square feet and below, the town cannot charge impact fees, and 800 square feet and below, the town cannot charge a capacity or connection charge. Those two things are different. Both are discussed in this report, but the capacity connection is sort of what you commonly think of as a hookup or a one-time charge to get into the sewer or the water system, and your impact fees are the ones that were listed here in the table here just a moment ago. So there are ADUs for which none of these will be paid given the size, because if it's under 800 square feet, you cannot require a separate connection, separate meter, separate connection for that ADU, and therefore there wouldn't be a new connection charge for it, and the B would apply for the larger meter that might be required for that ADU. And the other impact fees, if it's under 750 square feet, also won't be charged for that ADU. So in terms of deciding which one to do, it's really a class of ADUs that are above 750 square feet and above 800 square feet that you're talking about these fees applying to.
And similarly for JADUs as well?
Right. Given the size of those, I don't
Right.
think they'd be paying these at all.
They're be a lot smaller by that. Okay, thank you. That helps. Any other questions from Council Member Tripp?
I believe our current zoning code limits.
Can you speak into your mic for the streaming? Thanks.
Can you remind me the limit on ADU size on our current zoning? I believe it's 800 square feet. I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out whether we're ever going to have any ADUs that this might apply to.
Yeah, so I'll have to look it up, and then I will follow up on you. The reason why is you have SB9 units, which are limited to 800 square feet, and then you have SB9 units following an SB9 lot split with a different size in ADUs. So I'm happy to look it up, and then I will follow up in just a moment.
But generally, ADUs without a lot split are 800 square feet. Is that your thought?
Let me confirm before I say that. Yeah.
I only ask so that we don't have to worry so much about option 1 and 2 if really we don't currently have ADUs that would be allowed that fit in that bucket.
Any other questions,
I have another
Vice
question.
Mayor?
Thank you. The JADU question prompted a question from me for the town attorney, and for those out there, a junior ADU is basically, in essence, an attached ADU to a residence that someone lives in. They're attaching it, and it has certain qualifications. So if someone builds a new home, town attorney, and it's a JADU, and they identify that space as under 750 or something, is that space then exempt from that larger structure for these development impact fees?
If I'm understanding the question, if the development is proposed as a JADU or an ADU?
Well, a portion of the new home being built has an identified amount of square footage that is a JADU. Is that?
If it's being proposed with a new development, then the charge can still be made under state law.
Thank you.
Any final questions before I go to public comment? So thank you very much, Michael. And so this is a public hearing, so now it's time for any public comment on this item. Please, seeing nobody coming forward, I will now close the public hearing and bring it back to council. If you have any further questions or discussion and possible action. So, Councilmember Tripp.
If we get to the question of which options on ADUs, which kind of seems moot, I would, and I think you alluded to this, Mayor, I would be in favor of option 2, which would not contemplate a charge if you weren't increasing your meter size, basically, as I understand option 2. So I'm not sure I'm a little confused because at one point I thought I understood these options were not something we decided, but rather would be applied when the planning director reviewed it. But if it is an option that we do need to decide, then I would be in favor of option 2.
I have an answer as well on the size of ADUs. This mirrors the state law requirements. The maximum size for an ADU is 850 square feet, unless the ADU includes more than one bedroom, in which case it's 1,000 square feet. So if an 850 square foot ADU was proposed, it would be charged if you went with the first option based on the square footage, because it's above the limits in state law that would exempt it from these fees.
And so, Attorney Bell, we do need to make a choice. Am I correct about that then? Because in theory, there is a category that this would apply to of ADUs added to existing houses.
Yeah, and I might defer to Celia and also to Michael on the choice that's being made and how that's analyzed in the report. Are we asking council to make a decision on one of these two options tonight?
I'm hoping that Michael can clarify, which I think he did, because apologies, Councilmember Tripp. I was under the impression that it would be at the time of planning account application, but it sounds like, yes, there does need to be a decision made as far as option 1 or 2.
Yeah, so this would be to help alleviate some of the affordability concerns for ADUs. And this is really a policy decision on whether to charge them for the water and sewer capacity fee or do it based on the meter size.
So, Mr. DeGroot, I'm correct that option 2, generally speaking, would be less expensive if I was adding an ADU to my home, and it would generally be less expensive, I guess, is my question.
Yes, if you didn't have to upsize the meter, which is probably true in most cases, then you wouldn't have to pay for that ADU.
Okay, thank you.
Thoughts from other council members?
I'm ready to motion if you want.
Let's first take up option 1 and 2. My preference is option 2 at this time. I see some head nod. Want to make it official? Okay. We have, sounds unanimous that we'd like to pick option 2. So if there's, yes, Mr. Bell.
I just have one clarification on this and maybe a follow-up for Celia and Michael. If the ADU still required a separate meter or connection, so if the applicant were to say, instead of using the existing meter, I actually would like a separate meter for this ADU, I'm assuming that the capacity connection charge would still apply because you're not using the existing meter. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And in which case, I just wanted to be clear for the council, even going with option 2, some ADUs would still be paying a connection or capacity charge if they chose to have a second meter.
Correct. And it might depend, if somebody's still on 110 and you need 220 for a dryer, that would also invoke it, something like that as well. So there are possibilities where that would have to happen. Does everybody understand that, Councilmember Tripp?
I'm just going to ask one more question. So this goes to what you were saying, Gary, excuse me for pointing, Attorney Bell, about if you wanted to have it separately metered, which might be possible if you're going to rent it. So the language says, under option 2, an account paying a capacity fee under option 2 would be credited for the value of the capacity fee associated with their pre-existing meter size. So if you were getting a separate meter, you would not have a pre-existing meter size? Is that, I just want to clarify how that works. You see the language up there?
I would assume, yes, you would be paying for the separate meter and not getting credit for a meter that you already have, since you're not going to be using that meter or upsizing that meter, you'd be adding a meter.
Okay, and I guess I would ask Attorney Bell if that language is clear, that the credit for the value associated with the pre-existing meter size is pre-existing, but not for the main dwelling unit, right? Do you see what I'm asking?
Yes, I think option 2 really applies when you're not requesting a new meter or connection.
Okay, thank you.
And sometimes PG&E overrides a lot of things that you may want. I've certainly run into that with some units we were building for another organization I was working for. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so with that, I think we're all unanimous on option 2. Do we have a motion and a second on resolution number 234218? Councilmember McKee Kent.
I move that we adopt Resolution 234218 with option 2, approving the revised developer impact fees and capacity charges.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember McKee Kent and a second by Tripp.
And Mayor, just one comment on the motion. I support the motion too, but I think what we've heard and what I've appreciated in the last half year is talking about our ADU laws is that it looks like we really will continue to have a conversation about ADUs, and that this is just one part of that. But coming back and talking about the impacts that we want to improve, if that's the decision of council to encourage ADUs, will be an interesting conversation that I hope that I think with our new town attorney we will hopefully have in the near future to review how we support ADUs in this community. So,
any other final comments before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? That passes unanimously. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank everybody at Bartle Wells for doing another great job and explaining everything to us. We appreciate it. So.
Thank you. Second time's a charm.
I can't see. I have the wrong glasses. And now we're moving on to administrative regular items. This is a discussion regarding Chapter 17.128 of the Yountville Municipal Code regarding our tree ordinance.
Madam Mayor, I need to take a quick break, if that's a possibility.
Yes, so before we get started, we will take a 5-minute break. Freddie, we're going to wait till I get the signal that our mics are back live. She just said she's going to do it back there. Okay, we're good to go. All right, so now administrative item, looking at discussion of municipal code and our tree ordinance. So I see our planning director here. You're going to be giving our staff report?
I will be. Thank you,
All right,
Mayor
great.
and members of the council. As the mayor said, today we are talking about Chapter 17, 1.28, which is our tree preservation and management chapter of the municipal code. Next slide, Hillary. It was at the June 20th council meeting that the town council requested staff bring forward an item for discussion pertaining to this chapter of the Yountville Municipal Code, the tree preservation and management. Council requested a little bit of background information on the chapter and discussion on the procedures and processes in place for tree removal permits. One of the goals of the town is to foster a vibrant and healthy mixed species urban forest. Again, the preservation of trees enhances the natural beauty of the community. It sustains the long-term potential increase in property values and helps create and retain the identity and quality of the town, which is necessary, of course, for successful business to continue. And it improves the attractiveness of the town for residents and for visitors. And it also maintains the natural ecology and retains the tempering effects of extreme temperatures. It also helps prevent erosion of topsoil, provides protection against flood hazards, and it contributes to the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions. For these reasons, the town adopted standards and policies to preserve and manage its urban forest. Next slide, Hillary. The purpose of Chapter 17.128 is to promote health, safety, welfare, and quality of life. The objective, of course, is to encourage the preservation of trees. Next slide. The town reviews and approves application for to remove protected trees, again, pursuant to the Tree Preservation and Management chapter of the Municipal Code. A protected tree is defined as any one of the following. It can be a heritage tree, which is identified in this Heritage Tree Survey map. This map was updated last time in 2009. Next slide. A protective tree is a native oak tree with the trunk that measures at least 10 inches in diameter at breast height. It's also any tree with a trunk that measures 12 inches in diameter or more, or a multi-stemmed perennial plant having an aggregate of 20 inches or more in diameter and breast height. As a tree shown to be preserved on an approved development plan or specifically required by the town council or the zoning and design review board to be retained as part of a condition of approval of an entitlement project is also a protective tree. And then a tree required to be planted as a replacement tree is also considered a protective tree. Next slide. The town council is the approval body for requests to remove a heritage or a protected native oak. If a tree removal request is considered jointly as part of any application, development entitlement, for example, the town council or potentially the ZDRB render the appropriate decision on whether or not that tree should be removed. In all other cases, it's the planning department that grants or denies the permit. And again, for anybody that's approving it, whether at the town council or ZDRB or staff, there are certain criteria that needs to be followed for a tree removal permit to be issued. The first one is the condition of the tree with respect to its health, or whether or not there's imminent danger of falling or failure, proximity to existing structures, and interference with utility infrastructure. We also consider the necessity of removing the trees to allow for reasonable use, enjoyment, or development of the property, the age and size of the tree with regard to the appropriateness of the site in the area in which the tree is planted, or whether or not its removal would encourage healthier, more vigorous growth of other plant material that is in the area. Also, we consider the effect of removal upon soil erosion and whether or not it will result in significant diversion or increase in the flow of surface water. We look at whether or not the number, species, size, or location of other trees in the area and the effect of the removal will have upon shade, privacy between properties, or scenic beauty of the area. And then the last one that's part of our criteria that we consider is whether or not there's reasonable mitigation measures that reduce a structural defect in a hazardous tree to a less than significant level or hazard can be implemented. So again, if there's some maintenance that can be done to preserve the tree, we'll look at that. The way the code reads, it's that when one or more of these criteria are weighed in favor of removal of a tree permit, a tree removal permit shall be granted. Next slide. The town is the, wrong one. Sorry about that. The code allows for certain exceptions when a tree permit is not required, which is prior to removal, the owner submits a report from a certified arborist certifying the tree as dead or receives approval from the planning officer. The removal was specifically approved as part of a previously approved entitlement. The work performed is routine maintenance necessary for the health of the tree or protection of property, provided that, again, that non-routine maintenance shall be subject to fine and penalties. Prior to removal, the planning officer determines that the tree constitutes a hazard or a threat to the public health and safety of the property in the vicinity in cases where one or more circumstances apply. We look at whether or not the tree or trees in question are dying, diseased, or have been substantially damaged and will likely in the near term threaten the health and safety of persons or property improvements in the immediate vicinity. And such disease or threat is verified in writing, again, by a licensed arborist, or the code also talks about a licensed tree surgeon. And again, the code is very specific that prior history of poor maintenance affecting the tree should invalidate the grounds for a removal of an unhealthy tree. We examine, too, whether or not the tree or trees in question is classified as a pyrophytic, again, a fire type of tree, which includes Monterey pines, bishop pines, acacias, and eucalyptus species. We also evaluate tree removal or alteration by a public agency or public utilities to provide for routine maintenance of public land or utilities. And then whether or not the tree removal or alteration is by a homeowner or homeowners association when it can be demonstrated that the tree is causing damage to a utility that cannot be relocated or mitigated. Next slide, please. When a tree removal permit is requested, typically an application is submitted. I lost myself here. Oh, no, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, tree removal procedure, sorry. When a tree removal permit is requested, typically an application is submitted. Again, we require the property owner's signature and applicant's information and details about the tree being removed, such as the species and size, the location of the trees, and details of replacement trees. Staff may also recommend a report prepared by a certified arborist to provide insight into the tree's health. Staff relies on experts as a certified arborist to provide conclusions and recommendations on the health of the trees. Again, staff is not experts in this type of field, so we rely on those reports and recommendations on trees, as well as possible mitigation measures and possible replacement trees. Decision is made on the information from the certified arborist report and within the parameters of our municipal code. Typically, a decision regarding a tree permit request heard by the town council or as part of our larger design review approval through the ZDRB as part of that public notice and information. Typically, requests for tree removals submitted at an more administrative level, staff level, are not publicly noticed. So neighbors and things of that nature unaware that an approval process has been granted for tree removal or trimming. And again, we base our decisions on the arborist report and requirements of the code, and place appropriate associated conditions of approval, which are sent to the property owners, such as in lieu fee if a tree can't be placed on the property. One of the things, let's see. There we go. So in terms of reviewing some of the town's current, next slide, Hillary, sorry. In reviewing some of the town's current procedures for tree removal reports, and in the staff report that I did, I put some additional measures that could be considered, some additional steps in the approval process, such as a 10-day courtesy notice could be incorporated in so that the neighbors know that we have a tree removal request in that is being considered. And then that way we're getting the word out and we can see if there are any concerns from the neighbors. One of the other things the council may want to consider is the way the code reads. It says one or more of the criteria. So maybe it's two or more of the criteria can be considered in a tree removal. That might be a little bit difficult given, for instance, if a tree is dying, then there may not be any other criteria to consider, but it might be something to discuss in looking at the criteria itself. I would also suggest, too, that the town could contract with a certified arborist to either conduct a peer review of the arborist report that's submitted by the property owners, or alternatively, we could contract with a certified arborist to prepare the reports, and again, do a site inspection and make a determination as to what is the appropriate measures for that tree, whether or not it should be removed, and what the mitigation should be. So that could be an option that could be considered. Some of the other things that we're considering is just to kind of get the word out is, again, through OpenGov now, we do tree permit removals through OpenGov. So somebody could go through OpenGov to look at those tree removal permits if they have an address and see whether or not a property has submitted for a tree removal request. We could also provide some additional website information for people with just letting them know what the applications are that are submitted for tree removal permits. And again, it's just trying to get the word out. I think in reviewing some of our educational information, we can probably update that so it's current and make sure it's visible on the website so people are aware of it. And then the other thing I learned this morning, which is really exciting, is that Kyle Johnson, our assistant planner here, is in the process of creating an interactive map, which we could put on the website. He's done quite a bit of work into it, but it's an interactive map that'll make it easier for the public to see building permits, tree permits, special events, and all they need to do is click on a property and then the permit will pop up. So I was very excited to hear that news from Kyle this morning, but I think it would be a great asset to have on our website for tree removal permits and other types of applications as we move along here in the future. Again, today we're kind of providing you with some information, and I'm seeking direction on the chapter and whether or not we should incorporate some new measures into our approval process. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Thank you very much. I have a question for our town attorney. Just as a way of an example, since we are talking about our tree ordinance, I know that it's received a lot of public attention lately, one specific tree on Jefferson. Is it within the confines of this discussion that I could ask the planning director to kind of walk us through that removal as an example of how this kind of works? So we can kind of see, it's just one tree. It doesn't apply to all trees, but the tree on Jefferson, so that was a ministerial based on our ordinance. So can you kind of walk us through the process there?
Yes, I'll do the best I can. If I need any help or need any comments from Diane, she's the one who processed the application. But my understanding is that that tree that was removed actually is considered to be a pyrophytic tree. They didn't require a permit per the code, but Diane did require them to submit a permit and an arborist report so that we could evaluate the arborist report. And again, the recommendation in that arborist report was that the tree should be removed, that there was a danger of the tree falling. Again, there was no public notice. It was just we followed what the code said and what the arborist report recommended.
All right, so we rely on the reports. Town staff doesn't go out and physically look at this. We just kind of go through the process that we have.
We do go out and look at the trees or any other type of project that might be going through the process. But again, we are not the experts, at least in terms of the trees.
Okay.
And that's why we rely on the arborist reports.
Okay, and then you mentioned earlier sometimes you have a licensed arborist and sometimes a certified arborist. Are those one and the same, or are they different? Do you have to have a license sometimes to do certain activities versus if you're certified, that's usually given through some kind of a testing and academic institution. Are those the same when you refer to them, licensed versus certified?
I'm not sure that I know. I assume they're one in the same, but I would have to look at that again. We're looking at, when we get reports, they're typically from a certified arborist who meets all the criteria and responsibilities to be able to do that evaluation.
Okay, because earlier you said sometimes it's also a licensed
I think
tree surgeon.
That's the code says tree surgeon. In my short time here, I'm not sure that we've ever used a tree surgeon. It's always been a certified arborist report that we rely on.
All right. Any other questions from council? Vice Mayor.
Only because, thank you, Director Borba, for your report.
Welcome.
Appreciate that. And it's only a reference to your comment about pyrophyte, is that, or pyrophytic tree. So in this short listing, which I'm sure there's more that qualify, Monterey pine, bishop pine, acacia, and eucalyptus, I guess it was always my impression, if we're talking about specifically an example how this process works, that the tree on Jefferson was a Doug fir. Is that a pyrophyte? It was.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you for that information.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from council?
Are we holding off comments?
I was just going to go to public comment, and then we can do that, or we can even come back for more questions. So I'm going to go to the public for comment. Mr. Bork, I learned you. Please come up.
Thank you very much. I don't mean to be irregular. So I live close to the tree next to Jefferson. So first of all, let me thank everyone here for the explanation that's been given today about the way the process works. It seems that the process was done in a way that follows the codes that we have here. I would encourage the council to change those. In reading it and in seeing this again here, I think that there should be absolutely a notification to the community when a significant tree is going to be removed. I recall when the giant oak tree was removed from the walking path, that was an emotional thing. That I recall, in fact, a town council person shedding a few tears around it, and there was some anger with a number of people in the community. So I think this is a place where some thoughtful changes could occur. I really like the idea of having a arborist that is employed to double check what information is given about a tree. I'd secondly say that every tree in my book is worth saving. I'm not really sure why there's a segregation between one kind of tree or another. I do certainly understand that some trees are important or that they're native. We have a black olive, what is it, Kathy? a black walnut in her backyard that Kathy hates. I like it, but it's really mishappened, and she wanted to take it down and was not allowed to take down because apparently it's a tree that is protected, and I think that that's a wonderful thing, and we don't argue too much about it. But I would really encourage that a notification be made, that it be longer than 10 days. As much as I think that people should be applauded for paying attention to what's happening in town, most of us really don't. So having some notification, let it be 30 days. What's the rush? Certainly on Jefferson Street, the people who own that property now would probably own that property for less than 30 days before they removed that tree, leaving all of us who are on that street with the sense that they did it for convenience. Obviously, they haven't gone to the ZDRB. They haven't presented any use of the property in terms of what they want to do with that house. So it seemed like, oh, let's get this taken care of. Secondly, I think that, I don't know the details about this, but I think a really significant tree was removed from Perry Lang one day. I don't know what the facts are around that. It was, I think, a giant oak of some kind. It sat over the public areas that I sat at many times over the years, eating Mexican food and probably having a little too much tequila. But anyway, the in lieu fees are too low. There needs to be more notification. I think that double checking on decisions being made by people is a really good thing. Again, I appreciate the town has done what they needed to do. It was appropriate to do by code with these, at least with the tree on Jefferson. But I really encourage the council to strengthen these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything from the public else?
Hello, good afternoon, town council members. Hi to the new town manager. My name is Allison Bensick. I'm an upcoming senior at American Canyon High School, and today I'm here on behalf of Napa Schools for Climate Action. To start off, I would like to thank you all for taking one of our asks into request. With that, we would like to request a new and improved ordinance that highlights the significance and value of mature trees as the most efficient carbon sinks. As per our previous presentation, the science shows from the United States Department of Energy that it takes around 36 young growing oak trees to match the level of carbon sequestration of one old oak tree. And that is only if all 36 of those young oak trees grow for 26 years. In simpler terms, as trees get older and continue to grow, they absorb more and more carbon every year, and as they get larger, they have the potential to store even more for generations to come. With this in mind, and with all the other comments, we would like you to continue to keep making climate-conscious decisions and to continue to act now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. It's good to be here again. My name is Jim Wilson. I'm from North Napa. My children came up through the Napa Valley Unified School District, so I feel like I'm part of Yountville in that respect. I do advise the youth group, Schools for Climate Action. I'm a member of Napa Climate now, and I'm here today representing my grandson, who's 2 years old. I think it's a great idea to review tree ordinances these days. As terrestrial ecosystems, they're the best negative emissions we've got. They're in serious trouble because of our heat that we're trapping in our climate pollution. We have an opportunity here today, I think, to lead the way, a little like Yountville did lead the way a couple of years ago with the leaf blower ban. And let me explain. As the terrestrial carbon sinks best opportunity here in our valley, we might say, look at the presentation we just saw in the hearing around developers' impact fees. The first slide showed a beautiful aerial of Yountville. And so as we survey that terrain, we see urban uses, we see some farms, and we see some natural carbon sinks, altogether Yountville. And we heard in the non-agenda public comment the sense of loss around an old house and an old tree. and one person described the loss as an irreplaceable treasure. And I would like to second that thought, because this Yountville land use change, land cover type is your responsibility. Together, we are in charge of maintaining this carbon pool. So in that sense, the built environment, working environment, natural environment are our treasury of carbon. So this is the carbon pool that we're responsible for. One thing I haven't heard yet today, and I'm sorry if I overlooked it, is now that we have these old trees that are virtually irreplaceable, that carbon once lost because of the super fast clock and Yountville's commitment to 2030 net zero means that some of this lost carbon is irreplaceable. So the trick is, now that we have to remove this poor pyrophyte, it's lying dead at our feet. What do we do? And so we've lost the carbon capture. Do we need to lose, say, 100 years worth of that sequestered carbon? And I would say no. There's ways to preserve that, either by burying it or just laying that log on the ground, or by using, say, Napa Char, Pacific Biochar, Clean Burn Company. These are local biochar companies that take that sequestered carbon and preserves it. And so I would invite you to also explore that idea. If we're serious about preservation, we can do it now. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to present public comment on this? Seeing nobody else coming forward, I will bring it back to council for more questions or possible discussions. One question I have, it seems like some of the most egregious things recently to me has really been, having to cut down some of these oak trees because the roots have been damaged. So it seems like I would like to see, and I know we have that in other places in the ordinance, but I would also like to possibly, discuss having that in our own tree ordinance, because it's not necessarily the tree we're talking about, but if you damage those roots, you will lose that tree. I mean, the example, that we just saw at the church on Yount Street, and we've got some other issues kind of going around too. So any thoughts that you might have on that?
I think one of the things that we need to consider, again, at least with some of the approvals that we're looking at, is additional conditions of approval for projects, for development projects, to ensure that there is tree fencing put up, prior to construction starting. Making sure that, again, an arborist is involved and a plan is put together as part of those conditions of approval, so we know how those trees are going to be preserved and saved through those construction type projects. So those are things that, going forward, I think we need to do as well.
And also, can you kind of, and I know this maybe just to give us a range. So we've also had issues over the years. Somebody just went and cut down a tree and they didn't come to the council. So in that case, what's our current remedies for that? Is it based on DBH?
Yes, it's based on DBH, and then the replacement trees or the in lieu.
So, and those replacement trees or in lieu fees would be similar to what somebody would do if they went through the correct process?
That's my understanding, but I see Gary's going to.
All right.
Those are correct. I would just say, in addition to those remedies under your current tree preservation ordinance, the town could also impose, and has in the past imposed, fines and penalties for those violations. Those could be for removal without the permit. It could include excessive pruning, which is also a violation of the ordinance.
Right.
And those violations could occur over multiple days. So in some cases, there are quite high fines and penalties in addition to having to replant or pay an in lieu fee, as the director just described.
And that's going to be my last question for now before I turn it back to the rest of the council. Excessive pruning, do we really have, is there a definition for that? Is it kind of generic for all trees? Is it different for species?
I'm not aware that we have a clear definition. I'd have to go back and check the code to see what it actually says, but I don't think it's clearly defined.
Okay, because I know that I've certainly heard from many arborists who've come to talk to us that that is an important thing that can cause quick demise of a tree. So I like, maybe we can also talk about that being more clarity, whether it would go in, but, you know, again, sometimes you don't know until it's after the fact. So it just kind of goes to my argument about the roots. If it's not good for the roots, it's probably not good for the canopy either. So with that, I'm going to let some other council questions, or Councilmember Reeves.
I am very appreciative of having this explanation, because as I was reading the tree ordinance, I felt like there's not a clear sequence of do's and don'ts. And it feels to me like we could be a lot clearer in this ordinance, and starting out with the ideas of climate action, to talk about the preservation of our urban forest and the expansion of that same forest, so that we talk about the carbon sequestration and the value of that, and to include absolutely in our criteria and our mitigations that if there is a tree cut down that is significant and has a lot of carbon sequestered, that it be disposed of, as was mentioned by our public commenter. I think that's a huge benefit and should be happening now. I really feel like the introduction and the purpose of the ordinance needs to talk about how we are as a community and what trees benefit our community. And it's not just aesthetics, it's our way of life, it's our ability to breathe. It's I read somewhere that said it takes 30 trees to produce enough oxygen for one person to live for a year. So, I mean, there's this symbiotic relationship that we have that is important to us for our being on this earth. So, in addition to the things that were on the slide that why we're trying to protect trees, it should be the value to us as human beings and the value to our community, and that we all share this responsibility towards trees and this responsibility towards the climate. And ultimately they are priceless, though there are some websites that calculate the amount of money that a tree at a certain age gives the community. So, I mean, we could attach a price tag to them, but I don't know that that would ever, that would be an objective thing and not a subjective thing, which we're all about here. And I just feel like our criteria for granting a permit looks at liability more than it looks at what we save by saving the tree. So I think we could emphasize that a bit more in our criteria. And I would like to see the idea that all significant trees, whether they're a heritage tree, a native oak, or just a significantly large tree, are part of the protected tree group, and that they should be treated as such, so that all the criteria and all the procedures that we go through take into account that all these trees need to be saved as much as we can and as much as they can benefit from treatment or special precautions or whatever. It just seems to me that the idea of having an arborist that's on the town payroll, if you want to call it that, who knows the community and who respects our wishes, that person can be the enforcement person in development projects where no one has been able to go out and enforce the fences around until it's after the fact. There should be regular check-ins for things like that. And also, I don't think we should require the applicant of a removal permission to pay for an arborist. They should pay through the town for the town's arborist to describe the condition of the tree, because that's much more in line with what we would like to see as an outcome. A lot of arborists will conform to what they think their client wants, and I think that that's unfortunate for the rest of the community. We want to be notified. We want to make sure that tree is in a condition that requires a removal. But so I absolutely support having an on-call arborist for us. And I think that possibly streamlining the ordinance itself and consolidating our focus onto all significant trees and using our certain DBH as the starting point for needing a permit, that will allow everyone to know that we have an ordinance that they shouldn't cut down any tree without checking first. And I think that there's a confusion in town now. Oh, I own this property, I own this tree, I don't want this tree. But if it is publicized that we have a tree ordinance that covers all trees and that you need to make sure before anything happens to that tree, and that we also put in specifications for treatment of trees to prolong their life and to perk them up when they need it. And along with that, updating our heritage tree list, creating additional listings for native oaks and other significant trees. It's possible that we might need, I hate to say it, but a tree committee and a street tree ordinance or a street tree program, so that, for instance, in the ordinance it says that anyone who removes a tree must replace the tree with X size of a tree within 180 days. And I feel like in the ordinance it should also say that if this person can't replant on their property and they pay the in lieu fee, that the town should be responsible to replace that tree within that same time frame of 180 days. And if we, for some reason, have no public property that we can place a tree on, then we offer it to the community as a street tree so that we have more canopies and more shade and more relief from the ever-increasing heat that we seem to be getting. So I think there's a lot of things that we could do with this ordinance, but I think it requires looking at it a little deeper, not just adding a few things, not just taking away a few things, but really having a coherent set of guidelines that are streamlined enough to say, yeah, we're important, we have important ideas about trees, and it's important for you to check with us first, all trees. And then going on to talk about the 10-day notice, which I think is a really great idea for the community around that tree, and to get an arborist. And possibly this arborist could help with enforcement. So I just feel like we're lacking in quite a few areas in our tree ordinance, and I'd like to see more revision and assistance for it.
Councilmember Tripp, comments?
I echo what Councilmember Reeves said, and specifically, my thought would be to take out the exclusion of needing a permit for, and I hate to say it, pyrophyte trees, which I think originated that idea that pines were not worth saving because of the fire issue, and also they tend to have kind of shallow roots and fall over in wind. But I think in this day and age, not to simplify it, a tree is a tree, and so whatever ordinance we have should apply to all trees. Then also, after the mayor spoke, I was interested and looked at the duty to protect trees, and we do actually have in the ordinance pretty good specifications about pruning and how you take care of trees, and then we have an upper or a higher duty of care for heritage trees. I would apply the same duty of care for all trees. The language is pretty good, but it could be revisited a little bit to make sure that we've covered pruning and other things. But I like the word, a duty of care to take care of your trees. It's actually in the ordinance. We also have in the ordinance now, and the language is pretty good, a duty to take care of trees during a development process, and it actually outlines how that works. And I think that was a big issue with the tree at the church, that the roots got damaged, as the mayor said. So we now have a compliance officer. So my hope is that with pretty clear specifications as to what has to be done during development, that's in the ordinance and also will be in the development permit or whatever permit gets issued. I hope that our compliance officer really takes a close look at that. I also really applaud the idea of an independent arborist, either as a second check, or maybe if Gary said that it would be feasible, we could just mandate that the arborist report come from the independent arborist and be paid for by the applicant. I don't know if that's feasible, but I would be in favor of that. And if it's not feasible to but require somebody to use the independent arborist, then at least we have the option of the town using an independent arborist as a second check. And I totally agree with the notice idea. I think that just makes really good sense. So those would be my comments. I kind of think Pam is right. It might be kind of hard on the fly to revise the ordinance. It actually has a lot of, in my view, really good language, but it is, from a lawyer, I would say it's very specific, but it is a little hard sometimes to follow the exact process. So whether we change the ordinance or somehow reduce it to less legalese that people can more clearly understand, I think the education. And then finally, I wanted to thank Planning Director Borba for her suggestions, because I found that very helpful about what we could do. That very helpful. Thank you.
So, I just want to kind of weigh in a little bit on some of the stuff. It's there's a lot of trees that are big and great, but sometimes it's just not the right tree in the right place at the right time. So I think we have to be careful to really get some more understanding of what those trees are. Eucalyptus trees all came to California when they had to grow something really fast so they can make railroad ties, and now we all call them widowmakers. That's for a reason. They really aren't good urban trees at all. Same way with redwoods. People might think they're really wonderful, but they really aren't meant to kind of be here. They should be, up north where they kind of belong. So there's a lot of, fog kind of coming in, keeping them cool. It's a good growing place, because when you've got them in a urban environment like this, they suck up a lot of water. There's a lot of, breakage. There are just certain trees that I think need to be encouraged, but not necessarily all of them. And I would certainly like to get some more expert opinion on that before we kind of went there exactly, because although it seems on the face of it that any big tree we want to save, I think we need to just get a little more educated, because it is more complicated. And, some of these trees that some people, have planted, they're eventually, really, because they're not in the right place that they're in here in town, and you really have to understand their growing conditions. There's soil pH, and there's water use and sunlight, and all sorts of biological parameters that really kind of need to be considered before we put a lot of restrictions on these types of trees. And so, I think that we don't always have to have the most optimal tree, but just saying we're going to save everything without really having a full understanding of what we're, really trying to save. I would like a little more for us to, get a little more information on that. There's a great resource, a whole department doing a lot of work at UC Davis. I'm sure we could get one of the professors to kind of come down, and they're doing a big study they started about 5 years ago, really looking at the right types of trees for the right environments, so that they can really study, are these going to be good trees or not. So I think they can give us some maybe some general guidelines on that. And also, if you've got the wrong tree, you can really have a bigger impact on your natural ecosystem. So I think they can help kind of us explore that. I'm very familiar with biochar. I think it's a great concept about capturing the carbon. It's just not there in the amount of energy it takes. It's a complicated process too. I think that maybe more advanced technology might get us there, but it's not quite there yet to go say we need to have somebody really cut down a tree and take it to one of these facilities. They're just not quite there. And also, in terms of the carbon that the tree is storing, there's a lot of carbon, in the ground, and making sure that that's not disturbed, because that's what a carbon does. I mean, the tree does when it pulls in the CO2 from the air. It goes down into the roots. It goes down into the soil. You'll have very rich carbon, in that soil around that. So doing some mitigation there, besides, technology in my mind that's just not quite there, and I keep looking at it too, because we do a lot of, dealing with biochar, especially at landfills. So that's why that technology I'm pretty familiar with. So those are my preliminary thoughts. Right now I do think, having, a slate of arborists that, a homeowner can pick from, that, we find, or, definitely any arborists that's certified on our list, I'd certainly check their certification and make sure that they really are a certified arborist. But unfortunately, I think this is a little more complicated and might take us some time. We might be able to carve off a few nuggets, but I think it's going to be a bit of an evolution to really kind of get what we want. And anyway, I have more comments, but I'll let somebody else. Councilmember McKee can't.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm curious, with the homeowner, the new homeowner who received the permit to have the tree taken down, is he paying an in lieu fee? I'm assuming he's not planting something in that spot.
It's not a.
Can you speak into Mike? I just want to make sure TV land can hear.
I think Diana's concerned that we're talking about a specific item.
Okay.
So I don't know. Gary?
I'm not sure that there's a pending application, which would be the concern. And what was the particular question again? And then I can.
How are we offsetting the tree that was removed due to the new homeowner purchasing a house and then immediately taking out a tree?
So maybe in the context of this discussion, you could talk about how the town might offset the removal of a tree in a particular circumstance.
Again, there are options to provide for tree replacement. I kind of believe that in most circumstances, we try and get that tree replacement rather than the in lieu fee. It's better to, that would be the preference.
I guess it's just not always possible to replace the tree in the spot if you're looking at developing the property or something. So I'm sorry to ask something that kind of brings up confidentiality. So for the residents of town, I appreciate very much, Planning Director Borba, that you're looking at ways that you can do outreach and education. I am the type that always is going to lead by education and example. But when we're looking at contractors, I think that's a whole nother beast. I've evaluated our rules and kind of our criteria for and requirements. I think there are some areas that we can enhance those a little bit more. I know we have the tree protection zone, but maybe also a root protection zone when we're looking at fencing and the cleaning of chemicals and things that are done on site by crew that might not have the same education that the contractor would. So I think that could possibly help. I did look at Calistoga's rules, and I mean, they go into storage of chemicals and other substances, attaching signs and things to the trunk, chemical toilets on a work zone. So there were some requirements that struck me as being unique within their restrictions. And lastly, that is it. Just one quote, that society grows great when men plant trees whose shade they'll never know and never sit under. So I think that's an important quote as we remember we might be planting trees now, but it's the future that's going to sit under them and certainly need the shade and cooling.
Councilmember Vice Mayor.
Thank you, everyone. First, I want to thank the comments during public comment for the passion, and for you coming all the way from American Canyon to speak to this issue. We appreciate your previous comments, and thank you for a very eloquent statement, and I thank you for coming out today. So in looking through this, I guess I would say that I think with staff's looking forward, I do appreciate Director Borba's report, staff's involvement with this report. And I would say from your report, I definitely agree that all your suggestions to consider changes to the ordinance, I approve and more. But I think what we've just generally seen now with what's occurred in town at a couple locations, and with I think this council's concern about climate crisis, that it's really an appropriate time now for staff to update our tree preservation and management chapter in our Muni Code. I mean, I did the same thing in terms of, as the mayor did when I went online, just looking at different issues. I reviewed the California Urban Tree Council's website. I think they make some very interesting recommendations. I also, having spent some time in Davis too, when Davis is always a go-to for me, and that's a big tree town, and so they had good recommendations as a part of their tree ordinance. But I think our ordinance has a lot of specifics, and I think gives direction. But I would agree generally with the council's intentions that it's important that we really focus more in our ordinance on the reasons why we want to preserve our heritage tree and native trees and significant trees. So I have a couple recommendations, but it's not that they're not already included in the ordinance, but maybe it's with my intent that we clarify it. And looking as you provided us, I think St. Helena's ordinance, they define a significant tree, and I know in our ordinance technically you need a permit for a tree greater than the 12 inch diameter breast height. But I would think it would be better for us to really define what it means to and the importance of our heritage trees, our native trees, and to define a significant tree, or what we mean by the importance of a significant mature tree in our ordinance. And that might be a combination not only of DBH but also of height. I mean, in general, we've been talking about maybe recently about one tree in the community which was a prominent tree in Old Town. And we've lost some prominent trees. I know down the street at a few years, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we lost another prominent tree that I think an eagle used to nest in that tree. So I also think when considering heritage or a significant tree removal, that there should be more than a visual inspection by an arborist. And I think we've talked about that. Maybe we need additional information before approving a tree removal. I think there's just there are things that an arborist, a certified arborist, or their team can do to give us more information. And I don't think just a visual inspection is sufficient to approve a tree removal permit. I would also suggest maybe us looking at state regulations related to habitat nesting season. I know I had to have some experience and review when we were working on designing a project on Staggs View Lane, that habitat nesting season was relevant to work around the tree. It seems like it should also be relevant at some point in a conversation in our maybe an updated tree preservation and management chapter, that we look at habitat nesting. And I appreciate all the work that staff is doing, that you're doing to identify information for the community. I think technology and our websites will provide a lot more information for the community. And I would just say, I think after looking at St. Helena and Calistoga's and Napa's ordinances, that we should have the best urban tree management ordinance in the valley. And I think it's an appropriate time for us to start now to do that. So thank you.
All right, Councilmember Reeves.
I just wanted to reiterate that I think our ordinance should be not only practical but aspirational. There's a lot of information about why we should do it, and it should be incorporated. But maybe the technologies are not here for those kinds of disposals, but maybe they will be next year. So requiring some sort of way of harvesting the carbon and neutralizing it in another way needs to be put in there as an aspirational detail, and that we really are not looking to create a list of certified arborists for people to choose from, but rather I think the town needs to have a consulting arborist at their disposal so that that person is versed in our ordinance and versed in what we hold dear in this town, so that they make the judgment of how far to investigate into the tree to know that it's either a keeper or not. So I think it's important to have someone with a stake in the community who is actually viewing these trees and protecting these trees on our behalf. So I would stress that we need a consulting arborist that is dedicated to the town. And also I really believe in the education of our community, and that's why I suggested the idea of a tree committee, because it's not just to have another group involved in town, but it's to have a group involved in town who also talk to other people, who broadcast the importance of trees in town, and perhaps their job is to update the heritage tree list and create a new list of all the other significant and native trees that are in the town. And maybe they're also the interface for how we publicize that there are in lieu trees available to be planted on private property if that's necessitated. So I think there's lots of ways for someone to participate and facilitate our urban forest if we had a tree committee. So it's something to talk about.
Councilmember McKee Camp.
Just a quick thought on that note. We've already got a tree club, if you will, from the Veterans Home because they have trees from all over the United States there on property. So we've already got passionate people in the community. And I have worked with an arborist before because I've had a 40-foot Douglas fir fall on a house and impale our vehicles. They did not know the tree was diseased until, and the other trees up above, and this is on Mount Veeder, until they dug deeper in the soil. But they also came in and said, well, how do you want us to write up the report? So having our own arborist that can either ask questions of other people's arborists, but that will also have the value of our trees and our commitment to having mature trees. And also keeping a list updated. I know from Kim Cook, she has a sycamore that's from the 1800s that's not tagged and not on the list. And I mean, when we're looking at the history of town, and once trees are taken down, just like houses, they're gone. So if we have a list of heritage trees, I think that would help guide everybody and educate.
Mayor, just one last
Vice
comment.
Mayor.
I think it's a good suggestion. I mean, in my review too, in terms of a tree commission, I noticed that St. Helena has a tree commission, Davis has a tree commission. I mean, as staff is kind of working on this, I would appreciate your opportunity, if you have an opportunity to talk with staff in St. Helena and see how a commission works. I accept it's my responsibility as well when we meet in Nicolog and meet with other city leaders that I will ask them about their tree commission. I think it's important. It again emphasizes the priority that we have for preserving appropriately mature, significant trees in the community. And then I'm just really curious about staff reviewing more what pyrophyte means, because the advantage of having a computer is you go on there and they identify pyrophyte trees as trees that resist fire. So I understand, as the mayor's saying, they usually end up in the Sierras and all that, because according to this definition, a pyrophyte tree includes coastal and giant sequoia redwood. So we have some pretty significant coastal redwoods in this community, in particular also on Jefferson Street. So I'd want to be sure we are really taking seriously any permits that would allow removal of significant mature trees, and so maybe reviewing whether it's appropriate to have pyrophyte in our ordinance would be worth that time spent by staff. So thank you for your report. Thank you for all your recommendations. I support your recommendations. So thank you, Mayor.
So it seems like we all support the recommendations that you have. I mean, I think 300 feet, that's quite a big area. I mean, it seems like maybe 150 feet really kind of contains the neighbors around that. Where did 300 feet come from?
The 300 feet is consistent in our code for other projects that require public notice. Typically, it's a 300 foot. So again, for consistency's sake, we did 300 feet.
Okay, but if that tree's in somebody's backyard, they can't go in the backyard. They just know that that's happening. Okay, and I think I would like for staff also to come back with one or more criteria. I think I'm not sure which ones you're going to recommend, but I also would like staff to come back with the criteria for an arborist. What are we really looking for? And a lot of discussions kind of been going on about somebody, who is more of a preservationist. I don't know. I think there's a lot of good arborists out there that would probably, I wouldn't be an arborist if I wasn't interested in preserving trees. So I would think that would kind of come natural to many. But, finding that out, and Vice Mayor suggested maybe if St. Helena, talking to them and what they found, we've we certainly, I think the biggest tree thing happened probably 15 years ago, where we, had to consider cutting down the big grandfather oak. That kind of came up, and we did form an ad hoc committee, and that was a decision that, we were going to put a lot of mitigation measures in. So we watched it carefully. We had a gate that went across the path. When the winds were a certain distance, Public Works kind of came out and closed the gate. We put a sign, possible tree could fall. With a lot of things, we got about 8 or 9 more years out of that tree. So sometimes big trees just get old. But doing kind of what we can, I'm not sure. I think I'm not sure if we could find really experienced people in the community that really could provide realistic help with certain kinds of trees. I definitely think there are certain types of trees that just unfortunately shouldn't be in town, and we have to be very careful about what those are, and I think we just have to get more information about that. So my big question to staff, we're all over the map. So what kind of direction, maybe you could read back to us what direction you think that we're giving you, and I think...
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt that question, but I also wanted to, when I made comments about staff wanting to do this work, I also want to recognize the fact that with our new town manager, that I think the council is saying it's important, but I also want to recognize the fact that I appreciate staff working with the town manager to put together a work program and, to do something I think is significant to work on sooner, but I know it takes time to plan that, so I just want to.
And I certainly agree with that. So maybe some bite-sized pieces that kind of heard.
Since I was acknowledged, I think I can help take the heat off Irene in terms of, I have a full page and a half of notes, but I think I see a two-step process in front of us, and I also wanted to mention we do have an on-call arborist that we do use, and I know that's through our Public Works Department, and it was typically more for tree services, but I know they have a certified arborist that we've been using more and more for...
Is that Bill Pramick?
John?
No. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So I don't know who that is, but I would at least like to tap into our existing resources, and maybe they can bring some light to this conversation in our next round. But I would propose, just as a sort of way of simplifying the direction I heard today, to say that the council is supportive of all the recommendations that staff has made in terms of some of the other procedures to consider. So there might be an opportunity for us to act quickly and bring back an ordinance that meets that test, and then have a further conversation about everything else, because there was a lot, and I do think that we can get into some of the educational things as part of the next step, because clearly that's just kind of how you write it and how you explain it, and then how you inform the community, so to speak. But I know that we're also going to have a conversation about enforcement and kind of where those lines are drawn. So again, as a next step, I would propose us, coming back, and I'll work with Irene and the staff to have a two-step process. One where we can kind of bring something back relatively quickly that gives us some additional protections and strengths, if you will, and then secondarily, okay, what do we really want to do next? And I think, as I've explained to all of you, you have to consider that within the general priorities and overall workload, and that's where I'm really trying to get a handle of what the staff's capacity is, because I know we're going to talk about the next thing next, and I just want to make sure everyone's understanding and respectful of that capacity issue before we, every meeting have a high priority. Because I would suspect, and I'm not going to speak for Irene, but I do think that this will take, if we do what I just suggested, we could probably bring it back within the quarter so that you have something to vote on with a resolution and a specific action. And then again, it can be evolving in terms of what's next. So that'd be my recommendation.
I thank you for putting that together so I didn't have to. I appreciate that. So is that acceptable to the rest of the council?
I agree, Mayor. I think there's some high priorities, like primarily requiring more review before permits that we've made suggestions that staff can come back to, and that language is in our ordinance. It's just tweaking it to require maybe more scrutiny, and then I think we'll feel that we have more immediate protection, and then we can work through to really improve the quality of the language and the direction we want the ordinance to speak to. So thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Tripp.
In terms of the revision, and this is, of course, just my view, but I really would like us to take a look at that question of what is a pyrophyte tree, because we do have, in fact, I have 3 very large redwoods that I have contemplated removing on my property, and it's not to say you can't take them down, it's just to say you have to get a permit, and which might be very, very appropriate for fire or root or whatever. So I really would like to take a look at that question as to what requires a permit. And again, my personal view is that any tree of any size should at least go through the permit process, even if the decision is that it's a type of tree that for fire or other reasons doesn't belong there. So I feel kind of strongly about that.
Okay. All right. I think you've got council decision, and thanks for staff putting that together for us, our new town manager and our our Director Borbas. All right. With that, staff informational reports. Did you want to add anything, town manager,
No.
to what you talked about before we handle that? Any council meetings, reports, announcements? LAFCO, we had a strategic planning meeting here, and just something that will likely affect Yountville is on our high priority list. We're going to do a countywide fire and EMS survey. So I know fire and the costs we've all been through that. So I think a countywide survey of all that and the costs will be very useful. Any other council committee reports?
Well, we had a Climate Action Committee meeting on June 30th. There was a discussion and approval of a letter being sent on behalf of MCE because they were seeking a federal grant to create innovative and replicatable programs for energy efficiency and climate impact mitigations for disadvantaged communities. So they had selected, I think, 5 different places in and around Napa City as the recipients of those programs, and they were coming up with these programs to apply to those. And then there was a discussion of REACH codes, and I think if Hillary can fill in the gaps here, I felt like the discussion was a little bit stunted because I think the town managers needed to weigh in on that, the use of more stringent codes to create more energy efficiency in buildings. And I think it's worth looking at, but there were also some discussions around what American Canyon has done, which is just to simply require developments to go 15% above what's required in the ordinance that exists. And it's maybe a good thing for the town managers to talk about in their meeting about how that could work and whether that works, and whether other communities should adopt that for their permitting processes. And then there was also a discussion about the Climate Action Plan. The CAC was denied a grant for $586,000, I think, to the state, but then received a $500,000 grant through Bill Dodd's office and through the budget in Sacramento. And so the Climate Action Plan, I think, is a go. I left the discussion at a point where the CEO of the county had proposed that we be more practical about the timing of or the target time of the Climate Action Plan, because we have set 2030 as the goal, and he was talking about being practical, but at a certain point, we've already lost 20 years just sort of thinking it was going to go away. So it didn't seem feasible to delay that, and that sometimes necessity sprouts better ideas. So I left the meeting before that, and maybe Hillary can fill in what the decision was.
Well, it was right before the holiday, so actually we didn't go on much further. But just to add, in terms of the impact on Yountville, I think the tension that's going to be going on in this Climate Action Committee is whether all the towns are going to agree on certain standards. So like on the REACH code and the 15% reduction that American Canyon has done. If we all agree on a climate action, will we hold each other accountable and change all of our own codes in each town and at the county level? And that's certainly an open issue right now, but that's sort of what I see as going to be one of the major discussion points, whether we all end up with aspirational goals or we all commit to certain minimum standards. And we spoke about the different kind of prioritizing what is most important, and perhaps trying to agree that all the municipalities in the county would at least agree on some specific issues that seem most important. So anyway, it will be a very interesting development, but a really, really important in terms of and there is a desire to do something sooner rather than later, which I think is really good.
All right. Any other, Vice Mayor, you had a report?
Just briefly, Councilmember Reeves and I convened for the first time the Affordable Housing Standing Committee. And so I appreciate that the town clerk and the Public Works Director attended. And we had speakers from Napa Valley Community Housing, Erica Scalar, and another person that's been a longtime member for Napa Valley Community Housing, talk about how they could potentially help the town in looking at affordable housing projects. We also had the opportunity to talk with former town manager Steve Rogers, who gave us some background on his work, talking with the diocese. And so that's really our next step now is we're going to, I think, reach out to the Santa Rosa Diocese to maybe initiate again some early conversations that happened before COVID, talking about property that we currently have in our housing element zone for potential affordable housing anyway. So, and then just to move forward, just looking at other issues that the Standing Committee can work on. And so I want to thank Public Works Director Ferns for sending out the letter to Napa Valley Community Housing staff and the letter to Steve, thanking them for their presentation. So, and we'll move forward. I'm not sure if you have any other comments or.
Nope, that's good.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, let's move on to closed session. Town Attorney, do we have a closed session today?
Yes, there's one closed session this evening. It's under Government Code 54956.9, conference with legal counsel for anticipated litigation. Additional information on that is included on the agenda.
Do we expect any reportable action?
We do not. If there is any reportable action, however, it will be reported out at the end of the closed session.
Okay, take a 5-minute bio break. We'll be back.